Good evening. We would like to call to order the East Point Board of Ethics meeting today, Tuesday, August 23rd, 2022, at 6 p.m. Can we please have a calling of the roll?
Board Member Lloyd.
Present.
Chair Muniz.
Present.
Board Member Sasek.
Present.
Board Member Tubin. Board Member Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. At this time, do we have a motion for approval of the agenda?
I would move that we approve the agenda for tonight. Second.
Call of the roll?
Board Member Sasek.
Yes.
Board Member Wilson.
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd.
Yes.
Chair Muniz.
Yes. At this time, we're open for the hearing of the public, of which we have none. So we're going to move forward to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as published.
Is there a second?
Support.
All right, any discussion? Call of the roll?
Board Member Wilson.
Yes.
Board Member Sasek.
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd.
Yes.
Chair Muniz.
Yes. All right, moving right along to unfinished business. We're going to review and possibly approve the proposed bylaws. Everyone has had an opportunity to read over those and to look at those. And we'll start with the bylaws and then we'll look at the ordinance recommendations. Are there any questions or any concerns pertaining to the proposed bylaws?
Madam Chair, point of clarification, I believe. So the bylaws that we have in front of us now are what's being proposed, or was this the existing bylaw?
So the first set was the existing bylaws, and then attached to that in the back, where at the top it says adopted and it has an open space, those were the proposed bylaws that were put together by Mr. Albright.
Okay. I'm looking at my notes because I saw some conflict between the bylaw and the ordinance or the ethics code itself. And one of the concerns I had is that it mentioned that we would be electing a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. And then I also saw wording initially that had talked about we would be elected for 4 years, but we're only elected for 3 years.
Right.
So, you know, those are my key concerns right now, is just that the ordinance itself, the ethics code itself also addresses that it is 3-year terms, and that it is just the chair and the vice chair that is actually elected from within our group. So
Exactly.
that's all I really had.
Okay. All right. Mr. Wilson?
I see nothing worthy of addressing.
Okay. And a welcome to our newest member. Did you have any questions or concerns?
No. I had a chance to look through this, and I don't see anything that really get my attention right now.
Well, you guys are going to really love me because I have a few questions.
No, it's okay.
All right. I'll start with page 1 of the proposed bylaws. I think some of these are just errors, but in the first line it says hereinafter referred to as the, and it should have been, I assume, board in quotation marks, but it's an A and an @ sign, so we would want to make that change. Then in section 1, the board shall be comprised of 5 members appointed by the mayor and city council members, who shall each nominate one person to serve on the board and whose nomination shall be subject to city council approval. So if we could add in and. Section 2, I just wanted to get clarification on why section 2 was in there and how that would work. And so Mr. Albright, could you give us some clarification about that?
Yes, Ms. Chairperson, I'd be happy to. I believe that comes straight from the ordinance, actually. Let me just verify that. And to address the typographical error in Article 1, for some reason, when my office sends the document to city administration, I don't know why, and I think we've had IT look at it, and for some reason, these errors appear. And on my end, it looks like everything is being sent and everything is without error, and then when it's received, these errors show up. So I don't know why that's happening, but I apologize for that, but again, I don't know why that shows up. But with regard to your other question on the proposed Section 2, I believe that was lifted straight from the ordinance, but let me just verify that.
Yeah, I thought that I saw it in the proposed change, but I didn't remember seeing it in the current ordinance. Yes.
It's actually, Madam Chairperson, it is on page 10 of the actual, I know there's some changes on it, but the changes are in red on the proposed ordinance changes, but the black text is the actual ordinance itself, and it's on Section 2-103, Board of Ethics, subsection B, and then when you move on to page 10 at the top.
You said 2-103?
2-103, yes.
Okay.
Page 9,
Uh-huh.
towards the bottom, and if you carry over to the next page at the top, it is the third sentence in subsection B. So that's just pulled right out of the ordinance. But the bylaws do not need, because the ordinance already reflects that, if the board so chooses, the board
I
does
must
not
not
need
see
to
what you're saying.
replicate that in its bylaws.
Okay, I see what. So here was my question about that, and this kind of moves into a discussion of the ordinance as well. Is that language contained across the board in all of the ordinances and bylaws for each group that's represented within the city?
You know, I'd have to actually look at each of the bylaws for each of the commissions. Our office hasn't worked on the bylaws for all of the boards and commissions. That's something that I would have to verify whether that's in there. I just know that it is contained in the Board of Ethics ordinance, which was passed by the City Council a couple of years ago.
So here would be my concern. I think it's very clear why it's there, in order to prevent a conflict of interest. But my concern would be that if we are trying to encourage residents to participate on our boards and commissions, and then we put in language that limits spouses from participating, it limits the community's involvement. So I'm trying to understand the balance there.
Yeah, if the board believed that portion of the ordinance should be modified, the board can certainly make a recommendation to the City Council to reconsider that language, but that's the language that's in the existing board right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
If I may, too, I think a part of it is that this board is unique in regards to the functions of other boards. Our whole purpose is to determine if there are conflicts, if there are unethical things occurring within any aspect of city governance. And so I believe that's why that information is there. I know just recently, too, one of the things that came up is on our application to be a member of the ethics board, we were supposed to put down our birth date. And at the last city council meeting, I believe it was, that came into question. And again, the ordinance says basically that those of us that get appointed should have a background check done, just to make sure that we're ethical in that. And I believe that's why on the ethics board, there's a need for a birth date. Because it just, again, if they choose to do a background check on us, they have all the pertinent information they have. So that doesn't really send a flag up for me, because our board is kind of unique compared to the other boards and commissions.
I think it stuck out to me, just because my first immediate thought was, so if my spouse had already been on a board or commission, I would not have been able to apply for this commission. So I get it, obviously, but just wondered why it was there.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
my apologies for deviating from the agenda, but I was just informed by a member of the public that we are not transmitting audio.
Yep, I talked to
Are your
Rachel, and
microphones on?
yes, they are.
Oh, okay.
She's restarting the stream, so
Okay.
we're working on it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and thank you for letting us know, thank you. Then in section, so that answers the question about section 4 that I had. Moving on, I agree with Mr. Sasek. I had the same question pertaining to section 1, so I would say we need to strike the information pertaining to the secretary, because the secretary for this board is the administrator's office, the city administration. We don't have a separate secretary that functions on this board, and I believe that same information is contained in the ordinance. And so that then would take out section 5 and alter section 6 and 7 under Article 3, I'm sorry, under Article 3. Under Article 4, I had the same concern with respect to the 4 years. That's inconsistent with the ordinance. It should be 3 years. And under section 3 of Article 4, it says vacancies in offices shall be filled at a regular or special, and it should say special meeting in accordance with this article. So just that grammatical change. Article 5, there was a grammatical error in section 1. We know now why, just because of translation, digital translation. And then under section 2, it says meetings shall be held at the call of the chairperson or any 2 board members or the ombudsperson. I'll come back to section 2 under Article 5 because I have some questions pertaining to the ombudsperson. And then under section 3, there was this discussion of requiring a majority vote. But somewhere else, and I want to say,
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes,
Can you
sir.
tell me what page you're on?
yep, I am under the proposed bylaws, page 2, Article 5.
Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is the language the same for section 3 with respect to the affirmative vote being by the majority, or is it elsewhere stated that it's an affirmative vote of 3?
I'm on page 2 of the proposed bylaws under Article 5, Section 3. I see that language, and what was the other language?
And then I wonder, I thought that I had read in the ordinance, and I unfortunately didn't earmark this for myself, but I thought that either in the ordinance or elsewhere in the proposed bylaws, there was a mention of an affirmative vote by,
Majority.
does it say majority, not 3?
It's on page 10 of
Okay.
the,
All right, long as
Under-
it's consistent.
yes,
Okay.
under subsection E.
Got it, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, just wanted to be sure that we're being consistent. And then under Article 7, Section 4, it talks about a document prepared, owned, used, in possession of, or retained by the board in the performance of an official function shall be made available to the public in compliance with Public Act 442. I had a question. Does that include documents such as the letter that was received from a person in the community at our last meeting?
That section covers any document that would be subject to the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay.
So unless there's depending on what the document says, if there's an exception that's applicable, then that docket may not be disclosed to the public. But as long as an exception does not apply, it would be a foilable document.
Can we put language in that section that just clarifies that we're talking about documents subject to the Freedom of Information Act?
Certainly.
Okay. And then there's just an error in section, Article 9, Section 1. It's a repeat of Section 1 of Article 8 towards the end of Section 1, so we just need to.
I'm sorry, Madam Chairperson, which section was that I was
Okay,
writing down?
so in Article 9, Section 1, towards the end of that, the second sentence, the first sentence says, "These bylaws were adopted on blank 2022 and will take immediate effect and supersede all previous bylaws and rules of procedure." I believe that's where a period should have been, because the remainder of the sentence may be amended by at least 2/3. That's just a repeat of Section 1 of Article 8. So we just need to strike that. And then again, my last question on this bylaws, and we can move on to the ordinance, is since the secretary for the Board of Ethics is a representative of administration, should that signature line be the city manager as opposed to the secretary?
Madam Chairperson, if we could just go back to Article 9 again. So
Yes.
the language, the board is proposing the language should read, "These bylaws were adopted on blank 2022 and will take immediate effect and supersede all previous bylaws and rules of procedure," period or comma?
I was saying period, because just before that, it says, in Article 8, Section 1, it says, "These bylaws may be amended by at least a 2/3 vote of the full membership of the board, provided notice of the proposed changes given at a previous meeting." So to repeat it again in Section 1 of Article 9 seemed repetitious and
Yes.
unnecessary.
Okay, all right. I've struck the language after the proposed period. Thank you.
Yes.
And I believe there was a question regarding page 4 on the signature lines. We have
Yes.
the chairperson, and we're going to be removing secretary. And so what was the replacement for the second person?
Should that be the city manager as opposed to the secretary, since it's the administration that functions as our secretary for this board?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts pertaining to the bylaws? All right, hearing none, is there a motion regarding the bylaws?
I would make a motion that we accept the bylaws as amended with the recommendations to Mr. Albright.
And can we add to that to bring it back for a second read before?
Sure. And to bring it back for a second read before final adoption of it.
Is there a second?
I will second.
All right, calling of the roll?
Board Member Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Wilson,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz.
Yes. All right, moving on to the ordinance. First of all, I want to say, despite all of our questions, we want to thank Mr. Albright and his office for taking the time to put together the proposed amendments and changes. We really appreciate that. Does anyone want to begin with any questions or thoughts you had on the proposed changes to the ordinance? And just for our newest board member, Mr. Lloyd, most of the changes are contained beginning at section 2-102 of the ordinance.
Thank you.
And they should be in red on your, on the second copy. All right, I'll go ahead and begin, and then we'll circle back around. I have a question pertaining, I know we had a limited discussion at our last meeting about an ombudsperson, a liaison, an attorney to represent us, but I wanted to kind of hone in on that a little bit more and get some clarification. So the first question that I had is, I was trying to ascertain the difference between the purpose of the Board of Ethics and the purpose of an ombudsperson. Because in reading through the proposed changes and just reading through the ordinance as it originally stood, it's not clear what the difference in their function is, with the exception of the fact that the ombudsperson is identified in the proposed change as essentially someone who does dispute resolution. But how does that differ from what this board is commissioned to do?
I'd be happy to address that. So at the last meeting, there was a discussion about clarifying or modifying the role of an ombudsman. Under the current city ordinance, an ombudsperson simply makes changes to, or recommends changes to the ethics ordinance to the city council. So its role, an ombudsperson's role, is very limited. That role, however, can be expanded, and there are many different roles that an ombudsperson can take. If this board decides that it would prefer not to expand the role of the ombudsperson and make that recommendation to the city council for consideration, it can certainly do that. But this, an ombudsperson, per the proposed changes, is someone who is certainly independent from the city, but also has the ability to meet with somebody with confidentiality. So for instance, if there is somebody who believes that an officer of the city or an employee of the city has done something that might be a violation of the code of ethics, rather than bringing it before this body for discussion and possible action, the ombudsperson can meet with this person informally to try to mediate that issue. Perhaps after meeting with the person who is making or filing, or I don't want to necessarily call it a complaint because it hasn't reached that level yet, but maybe has a concern, meeting with the ombudsperson to say, I have this concern that this official or this employee may be doing something that might be a violation of the ordinance. So rather than going through an actual hearing before this body, which is certainly public, the ombudsperson has the ability to then take that information in and also reach out to whoever the official or the employee is, and on a confidential basis try to resolve the issue. It may be something that the person making the complaint isn't maybe familiar with the city ordinances, and it doesn't warrant the matter proceeding further. And when I say further, coming before this board during an open meeting, it prevents or does away with having to bring in possible witnesses from city administration, from different departments, and appearing here before the body. So it's an informal way, and the confidentiality of it is preserved. Now, the ombudsperson may meet with both parties and may not be able to resolve it. And the person making the complaint or requesting the inquiry may insist that there's more to this and actually file a complaint that would then be considered by by this board. So the ombudsperson is just another mechanism to try to assist in resolving a potential problem. And so that's why I've set forth, and I kind of took the liberty to expand that role of an ombudsperson, and that may be something that the board is not interested in considering, and that would be fine. We can simply strike through that proposed language and modify it in any way that the board sees fit, and then that recommendation then would go before the city council, and the city council may decide to adopt the recommended changes or make its own changes. So that was the reason for kind of taking the artistic liberty, so to speak, to include that in there for the board's consideration.
So a couple of questions pertaining to that. How then does the position of the ombudsperson as a mediator or third-party dispute resolver differ from the role of the city manager or your role as the city attorney in terms of handling a complaint like that informally?
Well, the confidentiality is certainly first and foremost. If someone meets with me, because I represent the city council, I have a duty to speak with basically my client, who consists of the mayor and 4 members of the council. So if somebody comes before me to complain about somebody that sits on the city council, I can't take the position of not telling my client. Okay, so now if someone speaks with the city manager, I think the same types, even though the city manager isn't subject to the attorney-client relationship, I think that the city manager's office certainly has a responsibility. If someone is making a complaint about someone, I believe the city manager would want to let the city council members know that there's this complaint. So it takes the situation where the city manager might be in this awkward position, or the city attorney in this position of receiving information, and now what do I do with the information? Do I now present this to the council, which we're compelled to do? So it removes all of that, and this ombudsperson then is able to do that, and they have confidentiality that they have. So the person making the complaint knows that there's a certain level of confidentiality involved, and the person who's on the receiving end knows that the ombudsperson isn't going to go off and tell people that this complaint has been made about them. So that's the difference.
How do we avoid the appearance of obscuring transparency? Because the whole point of having this board available to bring it, and the whole point of a public meeting when we discuss any complaint that comes before us, is to keep transparency for the city. So how do we keep it from appearing as though this ombudsperson is just an opportunity to skirt around transparency?
That's a great question. The ombudsperson is trying to resolve an issue, but that's why the city would want somebody in that role as ombudsperson who is trained and has the knowledge and the experience to recognize something, who would say, you know, this is something that's very serious, and this is something that needs to come before the board for consideration. This isn't something that the ombudsperson should handle. It's almost like it's somewhat of a screening mechanism to kind of filter out complaints that may not have any merit to them, but the ombudsperson would look at it to the extent that, well, there actually is something more here, and this is something that needs to, they would advise that person making the complaint, you know, there's not much more I can do here. This is something that needs to be brought to the board's attention for further proceedings.
I definitely think that there is a place for an ombudsman, just in the overall picture and the scheme of not necessarily bringing every little thing before this board. I can think back 2 years ago, and there's really a couple of things that started to come up that we spent a lot of time on, and in the end, it really was a case of it never should have gotten this far. So that if, with the ombudsman, it would filter that kind of activity out. And I do think it would help with the transparency.
Do we know who came up with the idea for the ombudsman for the city of East Point?
Well, the ombudsman role and position is already identified in the ethics ordinance. At the last meeting, there was a discussion on expanding the role of the ombudsperson and also having a separate person who would act as a liaison between the Board of Ethics and the City Council. So as I was preparing that proposed ordinance language for the board's consideration at this evening's meeting, in a lot of the materials I was coming across, I was seeing these additional roles that various ombudspersons can take. And I thought, well, this may be something that the board would like to have knowledge of and certainly discuss it at the next meeting. And so that was the reason for including that language in the proposed ordinance changes.
No, I believe as written, the role of an ombudsman would be a welcome addition to the Ethics Committee. I see that it would serve us very well. And I am supportive of it. And if the person is not satisfied with their interaction with the ombudsman, they always have the option to pursue it further to a complaint.
Thank you. And this language certainly is not set in stone. This is simply language that I've put together that if the board certainly has the ability to delete, add, make changes, because these changes ultimately will need to come before the City Council for approval because it is an ordinance change. But the board has the ability certainly to make whatever recommendations to changing the ordinance that it sees fit.
One other question. Are you able to provide us with any community examples where this is in practice? Like in terms of like another Board of Ethics or another city that has both a Board of Ethics and an ombudsperson?
I could certainly do some research and bring back communities that have. Off the top of my head, I don't know of any communities that have utilized the role of ombudsperson in this capacity, but that's something that I could certainly look into, yes.
That was my next question.
Thank you. You're welcome.
A lot of universities have ombudsman's offices, though, again, just to help with their issues and to filter that out, so.
Yeah, and the reason I asked too, because my concern is also with respect to if an employee comes and wants to talk to the ombudsperson, you know, just concerns related to the involvement of, you know, that employee as it pertains to the civil service contracts and all that sort of stuff. So it can kind of get a little sticky if the ombudsperson, you know, is having conversations with an employee, having conversations with management, and not fully or well versed on civil service requirements, not well versed on requirements for representation for the employee when they have a conversation, that sort of thing. So I'd love to see if there are some other cities that are similar to ours in terms of makeup who are employing the system of an ombudsperson along with a Board of Ethics, just to ensure that even when the selection process takes place, if we go forward with this, that, you know, there's some basis to say, yeah, this is the type of person we want to look for, this is the role that they can play, and it does work well.
That's why I left that as far as required qualifications or recommended qualifications. I left that out because I figured that would certainly be something that the board would want to discuss, and certainly if the council wants to go in that direction, that's going to be a discussion at a future council meeting as far as the qualifications the city council would be looking for in this particular role.
Yeah, I just think I would like it at least, even if this board, if we're going to recommend that we be able to even recommend this is the type of person that you want to look for, so that we give council as much knowledge as possible in our initial presentation of this. The other question I had is, what happens if a person refuses to meet. So in other parts of the ordinance, you know, if someone refuses to do something, then there's this set of consequences for refusing to do that. For example, if someone refuses to respond to the Board of Ethics, it goes through and explains, the if-thens. But in this case, it just says a person isn't required to meet with the ombudsperson. So what motivation, I guess, would a person who's being complained about have to meet with the ombudsperson?
That's another great question. I think first and foremost, the confidentiality of the meeting would be something the person would be interested in. If somebody is just making essentially a frivolous complaint, for instance, I'll just use my own personal example. If someone complained about me and they said, "Oh, Albright, he did such and such," and contacted the ombudsperson. The ombudsperson contacted me and said, "Mr. Albright, someone is saying that this happened," and I said, "Well, it didn't happen, and I'm certainly happy to meet with you." I think that would be a more economical way to handle it, as opposed to, "Nope, I'm not going to meet with you, and I want to go and have my day in front of the ethics board." Okay, it would make sense to meet with the ombudsperson so I could explain my situation. For instance, if it was simply an impossibility that I wasn't even in this particular location when this person was alleging that. That way the ombudsperson could say, "Well, Mr. Albright claims he wasn't there, and here's his alibi, okay? He was not even in the state when you're claiming that this happened," and then give that person opportunity to maybe retract that concern that they had, or maybe, for instance, they were mistaken and said, "Oh, you know what, you're right," as opposed to then having to go through the whole process of going before the board. You have this mechanism, this filter, so to speak. So that would certainly be one motivation, I think, for someone who is maybe the focus of a complaint or an inquiry, whatever you want to call it. So I think that would be one motivation for that, is the confidentiality of it. But no, all the materials that I reviewed in preparation for these proposed ordinances, meeting with an ombudsman or ombudsperson is always voluntary, and a person cannot be compelled. They can't be, they don't lose any rights. If the person wants to go before this board and essentially have their day before the board, that is something that they can do. But some individuals may wish to handle it on a more informal basis, and certainly the attractiveness of having it confidential may be something that would be a prime motivator to do that. And again, too, if the ombudsperson looks at this and says, "No, this actually is something serious, and I know that you may want to maintain the confidentiality, but this is something that based on my experience, I believe that there's a clear violation that took place, and this is something that's better handled by the Board of Ethics."
So do you suggest the ombudsperson is an attorney?
Not necessarily. I think that there are the materials that I was reading, that there are courses, there are seminars, there is training for people to act as an ombudsperson, and I don't believe that that person being a licensed attorney is a requirement. In fact, in some ways, it may be something that is not preferred.
What about them being well-versed in alternative dispute resolution processes, though? I would
Yes.
like to think
I like that, yes.
that they should have a very clear background
In
in
ADR.
alternative dispute resolution.
Yes, certainly. I would highly recommend that. Just given the nature and the role that's proposed in these ordinance changes, I think that someone having a background in alternative dispute resolution is key.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I know we moved on, but when my wife came in, she made me think about something. With the bylaws and Article 2, Section 2. I don't know if I can address it now or after the fact.
if you want to address it when we get to, the board member comments.
All right, thank you.
All right. So the next question I had, we'll move on a little bit. I'll probably have more questions when we come back for a second reading, but in section 2-103D of the proposed changes, a couple of things. So I know we had the whole, and I'm sure if I look back at the minutes, I may have been the one that even brought up the idea of trying to understand the liaison for this board. And in going back and looking and thinking through it, we may be the only board that does not have an appointed or assigned liaison like some of the other boards and commissions. And I'm wondering, one, is that purposeful, since the person who could be seated as our liaison could also be the subject of a complaint before this body?
It's possible.
So that caused me to wonder if maybe we should not do that and rather just continue to rely on the city manager to be our voice, so to speak, as a liaison between us and city council. I don't know what the rest of the board's thoughts are on that.
That makes sense to me.
Made sense to me too.
I concur.
So, and that being the case, I would just say thank you for putting that language together, but we would want to strike that whole section.
And not that the city manager needs us giving her more stuff to do, right?
Right. But that's a function that I believe she already does, and her office does very well, to communicate, on our behalf to city council.
I've removed the proposed language.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I was just trying to go through my notes. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to go ahead. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything else.
We were thinking alike, so.
Well, could we change the language, add to the ombudsman responsibilities to be a liaison as required?
I'm sorry, can you ask that question?
Could we change the language or add the responsibility to the ombudsman to be a liaison as required?
Would they really be the liaison between, when that,
Could we appoint as one of the duties of an ombudsman to go to the council as a liaison if required? If we as a board require that? Would that be practical?
I'm wondering how that affects neutrality.
Right now, the current ordinance states under section 2-102B, the ethics ombudsperson may recommend to the city council that an advisory opinion be sought from the city attorney regarding any requirement of this ordinance and its application to the officers and employees of the city, and also that the ethics ombudsperson shall promptly advise the governing body, meaning the city council, of the city of any problems encountered within the implementation of the ordinance and as to any recommendation that he or she may have for improvements of the ordinance. So that in and of itself is assigning a duty to the ethics ombudsperson to, if they see any issues or they believe an opinion is required. As far as reporting to the city council, these meetings are televised. Any of the council members are free to watch the meetings. They're free to attend these meetings. I also, on a monthly basis, prepare a monthly status report to the city council. So if there was something that the board wanted me to report, not necessarily giving a legal opinion, but to simply pass along information. Then, of course, Ms. Walton, she prepares her very thorough weekly report, which goes out on Fridays to the council as well. So I think that there are already several mechanisms for the city council to get information. And I haven't heard any issues by either the mayor or any council members about not getting information. So I think that is being satisfied. Now, if I get an email or a call from the mayor or any city council member saying, no, we want this, I'll certainly bring this back before this body and say, no, the city council or the mayor is recommending that A, B, and C happen. But I'm not aware of any issues at this point. As far as information getting back, I think, like I said, between my reporting and Ms. Walton's reporting, which is, in Ms. Walton's case, on a weekly basis, the council is well informed.
The only other thing that I would add is with respect to timing. So I know the ordinance outlines the timing for the board once a complaint is received, how much time we have to deal with it, resolve it. So if we could put some type of timing clause in that gives some idea of how quickly an ombudsperson may respond and try to deal with a complaint, to give them adequate time to deal with it before a person would file a complaint, should we go in the direction of an ombudsperson. And then the last question I had on this is, it had in red fee schedule, but where is that?
Oh, I left it in the end only because I didn't, and I know we did this on, there's another proposed ordinance that's coming before the city council in September, and the fee schedule is blank because that is something that's going to be ultimately discussed and debated and decided upon by the city council. So that's the reason for leaving
Awesome.
that blank. I know that the board wanted to see a fee schedule, so that's why I put that as a new section 2-105 fee
Perfect.
schedule, but I left it blank so the council then can discuss that.
Okay. All right. Do we have, are there any more discussion on this issue of the ordinance recommendations?
Madam Chair, if I could just address
Yes,
something,
sir.
a comment that you made as far as a time frame. I'm certainly open to taking any suggestions with what I can include in the proposed ordinance, but with regard to the ombudsperson, nothing that I saw had any type of time restraints in there. I think it's left to the discretion of the ombudsperson to try to work through a resolution or a goal or work towards a goal without any type of necessarily time constraints, and leaving it up to their discretion that if they believe that there's something serious enough, they need to bow out and say this is something that needs to go before the board, and the board needs to schedule a hearing as soon as possible. But again, if the board wants to include some type of time frame that once the ombudsperson is put on notice that someone wants to meet with them or they do meet with them, that they have to, get from point A to point Z within a certain period of time, then the board can certainly make that recommendation. But that is why I left that blank and didn't have any time constraints in there, to just leave it up to the ombudsperson to use their discretion in trying to mediate a potential issue.
I think my concern there was twofold. One, that it not be something that run on to the point that the person bringing forth the complaint no longer has a ripe complaint. I don't think an ombudsperson would do that. But, let's say the issue occurred, January 1st, and we know that there's a time frame even in which the complaint has to be brought to this board. So, if they continue to try and resolve it and it's not resolved, and should we, worst case scenario, just have an ombudsperson that's just not handling the matter in a fast enough time frame, I would not want someone to lose out. Or let's say they came at the last minute. They came, at the 11th hour with their complaint. And were it not handled in a timely manner, it would no longer be ripe for bringing before this board. I think it's just necessary to have something that, if this board has to look at a complaint within 90 days, I would think that an ombudsperson should at least, have some type of initial meeting to address it within 90 days. And if they, at the conclusion of whatever time frame, another 90 days, they don't think that they can have the matter resolved, that they then refer it to the board, or just, say this matter is closed out, it's not actionable. But you just don't want a complainant kind of hanging in the wind. So that was the thinking.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The complainant, of course, could always simply say, you know, I'm not getting anywhere with the ombudsperson, and thank you, but I'm going to go before the board and address my grievances before the board. Same thing with the person who is the subject of a complaint or inquiry, could simply say, you know, this should have been resolved 6 months ago, and it's just kind of hanging out there. The ombudsperson doesn't return my calls, doesn't get back to me, and I'm going before the board.
But I'm just thinking if it's in black and white in terms of accountability and expectation for all parties, then it's clear as to, you know, even so that you don't have someone who's just overly zealous and is not giving the ombudsperson an opportunity to resolve it. If it's clear that here's the expectations, here's the guidelines that they're following, and while we don't want to put a restraint so much on their ability to resolve the matter, we also don't want to leave it open to question, I guess.
Yeah, perhaps the board could include language in the proposed ordinance language that an ombudsperson will strive to resolve issues brought before his or her attention within 90 days or 120 days, something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
So they have just kind of a model to work from that, okay, I need to try to get it done now. Maybe it may go slightly beyond whatever time limit is in the ordinance, you know, for whatever reason. Maybe someone gets sick or someone isn't available for whatever reason. Or maybe there's a scheduling issue with getting the parties all together. But you could have that time frame in there that, for instance, the ombudsperson shall strive to resolve these matters within X amount of time.
And if they're not going to resolve, if they don't see that resolution is in sight, make it clear to the parties that they have the opportunity to go before the board. Okay. With an official complaint. Okay. All right, any other discussion? All right, is there a motion to?
I would make a motion then that we send it back to Attorney Albright, and he make the adjustments that we discussed tonight and bring it back to us for finalization at a meeting to be determined that will work with his timeline.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, calling of the roll.
Board Member Sassick,
Yes.
Board Member Wilson,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz.
Yes. All right, so we're in for new business, election of a new vice chair. We have, do we have any recommendations or anyone that would like to put a name forth for that?
Well, I will nominate Gary Sasek.
Oh, second that.
Okay.
All right, so is that your motion? We want to make a formal motion then?
Yes.
I second the motion.
All right, calling of the roll?
Board Member Wilson,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz,
Yes.
Board Member Sassick.
Yes.
All right, well, welcome. All right, at this time, we will roundtable with board member comments, and we will begin, we'll begin with our newest member, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was looking at Article 2, Section 2, no person shall be appointed as a member of the board who is related either by blood or by marriage up to the degree of first cousin to any officer or person of the city of East Point. Now, in terms of officer, is that referring to like someone else that's on another board of commissions?
So, Mr. Albright, would you like to interject in there?
Because the reason why I asked, because my wife was on the Parks Commission, and she resigned before I took a position on this commission.
Actually, I think she was on beautification.
The beautification, I'm sorry, beautification
Oh,
commission.
that's okay.
Yeah, and, just in case she wanted to get on another board, is that possible?
In this context, the word officer, I believe, is referring to either mayor or a city council member, but it's just those two titles being put into one word of officer.
All right.
So this does not to impede on your comment, but, so this does not include boards and commissions?
Correct.
All right, perfect. That was the only question I had.
Thank you.
All right, did you have anything else you wanted to add or share?
Nope, that was it.
Okay.
I'm glad to be a part of the team. Someone brought to my attention prior to the last city council meeting about my birthday not being on the application. I submitted that a year ago, so I don't know how that happened. I can get that to the city manager right after this meeting.
If I can jump into, council did have a conversation about it at the meeting that you were appointed. There is no place on the application for a birth date to be added. So anyone that was appointed in the past several years did not include a birth date. And so there was a motion and support at the council meeting to remove that from the ordinance. And I believe that's something that Mr. Albright is working on. So there will, or is likely based on the last vote, to be a change to that language in the ordinance in that requirement.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
Madam Chair, if I could just
Yes.
correct myself. I looked up the actual definition in the ordinance, and I do stand corrected. Officer actually is defined, and it does read, and I'm reading verbatim, officer means a person who holds office, meaning either the mayor or a member of the city council, by election or appointment within the city, regardless of whether the officer is compensated for services in his or her official capacity, and department heads. So just want to make
So then that language would include boards and commissions. That's how I had read
Yes.
it, but, okay.
That's what I was wondering.
Right.
Yeah.
I apologize. I would just want to make that clarification.
Thank you.
So just to bring clarity, her and I couldn't be a part of two different boards within the city at the same time.
For this
For me.
particular, right,
Yeah,
if
for me,
either of you was
Board of
appointed
Ethics.
to the Board of Ethics,
Exactly.
then the other couldn't be on another commission. But you could be on, correct me if I'm wrong, you could be on Parks and Recreation, and you could be on Beautification,
But not the
husband
Board
and
of
wife,
Ethics.
but not Board of Ethics.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, sir.
Because I agree with Chairman Muniz, that we're really limiting who could be on boards and commissions then, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that was clarified.
All right, Mr. Wilson?
Well, congratulations to Mr. Cizik on his election to
Thanks,
Vice
Mr.
Chair.
Wilson.
Welcome, Mr. Lloyd, and overall, very good meeting, very productive.
Absolutely.
All right, and Vice Chair Stasek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody. Again, I enjoy working with you. Mr. Albright, thank you so much for your wisdom in helping us, because we are definitely newbies at this. City Manager Walton, I enjoy working with you. Mr. Gaston, we've had wonderful conversations. I don't know where this year has gone, but in roughly 2 weeks, we are going to be in September and Labor Day. So I would like to wish all of you a safe Labor Day, and I hope time slows down a little bit. And Bishop Lloyd, thank you very much for being a part of our group, and I look forward to working with you. And that's all I have tonight.
All right. I'd like to say, first of all, welcome, Bishop Lloyd, to the Board of Ethics. Thank you for caring enough about the community to get involved and work with us. To Mr. Stasek, Vice Chair Stasek, thank you so much for agreeing to that appointment. And of course, Mr. Wilson, I'm very happy to have you as a part of our team. We did miss having Ms. Tubbins here tonight. She is under the weather, so we pray for her speedy recovery. I would like to propose that we look at scheduling our next meeting in October. I did take the liberty of checking with Mr. Gatson ahead of this meeting. And if everyone could look at their calendars for either October 11th or October 18th. And then Mr. Albright, if you could confirm with us whether or not that would be sufficient time for you and your staff to have documents prepared for us for a second reading. We'd like to maybe come back so that it's still somewhat fresh in our minds, what we've discussed tonight.
I think we may have to go for the 18th, because the 11th would be a city council meeting. No, it wouldn't.
No.
The 18th would be a city council meeting, so We may have
Is
to
it?
go for the 11th.
Okay.
Madam, no, it's not. When they made the, changes in the dates prior, they're the fourth and the first week and the fourth.
Yeah. So the week of the 17th is actually the MML conference, so there's no council meeting that week. Most will be at the MML conference in Muskegon that week.
Oh, okay.
So yes, I would be available on the 18th.
Okay, so could, if it's okay, with everyone.
I'm available.
We'll look towards the 18th.
I'm available.
Okay. So, Mr. Gatson, if you could, just send a note out to our whole team, that way we can, make sure that Ms. Tubbins is also available.
And is 6 p.m. still good?
Mhm.
All right, that is all that I have. Thank you again, Mr. Albright and, Ms. Walton and your team, just again, for your consistency in assisting us, in doing our jobs and doing it at the best we can. You guys make us look good, so thank you for that. With that being all, is there a motion to adjourn?
I will motion that we adjourn.
Second?
A second?
All right, calling of the roll?
Vice Chair Sasek,
Yes.
Board Member Wilson,
Yes.
Board Member Lloyd,
Yes.
Board Chair Muniz.
Yes, we are adjourned.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Congratulations again.